I'm really excited to talk about rural implementation with Pbis. I think it's a bit of an understudied area, and we know that there are a lot of rural communities across America. We talked earlier in my session about rural communities being very prevalent in the Southeast, also in areas like West Virginia and Kentucky, and all the way up in areas like Maine, and then over to South Dakota and Idaho. So across our country, we have educators who are looking for ways to implement Pbis, but maybe their district doesn't look exactly like the districts that they see on the Pbis videos or exemplars they've seen at different conference presentations. So we're really excited to be focusing on rural implementation of Pbis. And I do want to start with being really clear about our focus not being on the barriers or the deficits or the risks that rural communities have. There are certainly things about rural communities that can hinder implementation or make it a little bit difficult. But we try to focus on building on strengths. Rural communities have a lot of great strengths that we've been able to engage with and identify and help us in problem solving and making Pbis work for their settings. So really quickly about risks, we do know that rural communities suffer more from substance use issues, have higher rates of child maltreatment, but that's not the end of the road. There are a lot of strengths in rural communities. We talked earlier about 5 really great strengths that are common in rural communities, and I'll focus on 4 for the key features of rural Pbis implementation. So one is resourcefulness. We see rural communities across, in my work across Texas and Georgia and Alabama, where educators have limited resources. We don't have schools that have a lot of extra funding or have a large pot of money from PTO. So when you ask them to develop a recognition system, we see educators get really resourceful about surveying their children about what they would like to work for, and then finding ways to make things offerable that are cost-free. So we talked earlier today about allowing things on your school menu for points or tickets, whatever you're using, that might include choosing your seat or eating with a friend at lunch, even being able to retake a test or being able to have a pass to get an extra day on an assignment. So based on what the building's comfortable with and what the students are willing to work towards, we see a lot of educators being really resourceful around finding things that their students can get excited for and work towards. We also see resourcefulness come up in teleconsultation and telecoaching. So we've been using a coaching model for our schools that are farther away, that it would take a long time to drive to, mileage and time, where we're doing video conferencing for our monthly meetings to coach them through the use of data and looking at their practices instead of driving out there. So that's another great way of leveraging the resourcefulness of folks in the rural communities. The second one is community. So in rural communities, we see a lot of strong collectivism, the mindset that we're better together and we can do things together and not one person's all alone. We talked earlier today about in farming communities, how we don't have people who are driving to work to sit in a cubicle by themselves and engage with a computer. You're talking about a farmer who's trying to get really difficult tasks, large tasks done, and sometimes needs other people around for support. And rural communities are really great at pitching in and helping each other. So we try to leverage that when we go to rural community schools and figure out how can we engage with the community? How can we build the school up to be one large community? And that works out really well with a standard, consistent set of expectations, a common set of language. It also helps with parent engagement and trying to build that community and kind of extend it past the rural community itself into the school. The third one that we talk about a lot is social capital. So you might think of rural communities as not having a lot of social capital, but the way we like to look at it is they actually do. Because a lot of rural families choose to stay in the same rural community, they have generations of familial capital. So they have grandparents around to help out, and they have aunts and uncles and cousins and neighbors they've known forever, and people in their churches and schools that they've known forever. So we like to try to figure out how to leverage that. So when we're talking about family engagement. We might actually also be talking about parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and whole families. So we like to try to focus on the capital that is in rural communities that makes them so strong. The last one is pride. There are a lot of schools that choose pride as one of their acronyms for PBIS, and we see a lot of hometown pride in rural communities where families like living where they live. These jobs or farmland may have been passed on through generations, and so we tried to leverage that sense of pride and hometown pride into what we can work with PBIS expectations, with fulfilling a good, prideful school community. So we kind of extend the hometown pride into school pride. And we see schools that handwrite their own posters and come up with great celebrations and songs and dances and t-shirts. So we see examples of that all the time. But I would say, to answer your question, the key feature would mostly be to not focus on the barriers or the things that hinder PBIS implementation in rural settings, and try to focus on the strengths that are available in that rural community. And so the ones that I went over again were resourcefulness, community or cohesiveness, social capital, and pride.